All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Supervisor?
I will be happy to. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well, and I hope you all have either been vaccinated or signed up for a vaccine here through Coconino County. My name is Patrice Horseman, and it's my honor to be your supervisor from District 1. And I want to thank you for joining us this evening. The county is very pleased to provide you an update on its museum fire flood mitigation efforts and to provide information on the upcoming phase 2 of their flood mitigation projects. Tonight, Deputy County Manager Lucinda Andriani and her team and the consultant J.E. Fuller will be providing some details and some discussions on the phase 2 flood mitigation efforts. And there'll also be some folks here from the Coconino County National Forest. Deputy District Ranger Josh Peck is with us here tonight to discuss watershed conditions, and meteorologist Brian Klimowski, and I may have just totally mispronounced your name, from the National Weather Service is also going to provide us a forecast on the upcoming monsoon season. As you know, we're getting ready to get into our spring and monsoon season. Also, I was going to introduce you to District 2 new supervisor, Geronimo Vasquez. And as you know, District 2 encompasses the Sunnyside area, right across the street, actually, from the District 1 flood mitigation area that we're going to be talking about. I'm not sure if he was able to make it here or not tonight, but we have a lot to cover. And I want to make sure to turn it over to the experts and those that have the most knowledge on that. So with that, Deputy County Manager Lucinda Andriani, I'm turning this over to you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Supervisor Horseman. And we're excited to be with everyone tonight to move this forward. It's been a process, and we recognize that. And we know there's a lot of anticipation to, as was stated earlier, to get this into the ground and move this forward. Just a few comments that I want to make as we launch this. We've got all of our team here with us tonight. We have the contractor with us. We have the firm that's conducted the engineering and developed the plan for the individual lot mitigation. We've got the weather services, as was noted, as well as our consulting partner, J.E. Fuller, who has, as you know, from 19, conducted the original analysis even prior to that, and then updated that with the burn area information. And they've got a really important update for you to look at a monsoon analysis that they've conducted, as well as an input on the condition of the watershed. So I think you'll find that really important and valuable. And as we launch into this project, and of course, Christopher Tressler, our county engineer, and district engineer, this is a flood control district project, obviously, and we'll talk about and get into some of the details of the project a little bit later, but we wanted to preface it with some updates that we think are really should be of value to you, we hope. I want to make a few comments about the project. We're really using a model that we developed from the Schultz flood mitigation effort that was successful there, which, and I referenced this earlier, we call this type of project an individual lot mitigation effort. And as a result of looking at it that way, it doesn't preclude that this isn't a system. And so it's important to understand this is a system of mitigation, but in effect, we're looking at each individual lot and how do we mitigate for the structures on that lot, particularly the home, within the parameters that we have. And those parameters have to do with how much mitigation can we bring within some range of what is acceptable not only to that property owner, but adjacent property owners. And very importantly, J.E. Fuller also did an analysis to look at the downstream impacts, because for any property downstream of this project or the individual lot mitigation pieces, we have to be very clear that we're not having an adverse impact. And so we've been through that exercise as well. So, and I think most of you that have been directly impacted by this project have met with Christopher on and Charlie on a number of occasions, and you should be pretty aware of what's planned, because we're also in the process of securing what we call cooperator agreements. And in this case, in an individual lot mitigation, it's really important to understand that this is done through a cooperator agreement. We are not securing easements for the project. And the major distinction in not securing easements is that it gives us a little bit more flexibility, but it also means that the county flood control district will not be responsible for the future maintenance of the whatever improvements are planned on individual parcels. And that's certainly outlined in the cooperator agreement that's been provided to you, or certainly have been provided to you, or will be provided to you shortly. So it's important to understand that once the project is completed, that really the ownership and the maintenance of those improvements, do move to the individual property owner. And this is, again, we did exactly the same approach in a number of areas out in the Schultz flood mitigation area. So this is very consistent with what the flood control district has done historically. The other piece to this that's really important to understand, and I know you all understand this, is that in this model, we can only mitigate to a certain level of storm. And you saw that in the letter that was shared with the community. Because the flood flows are potentially so much more significant post wildfire, that we can only, mitigate a certain level of storm. And again, this is very consistent with what took place out in Schultz, where I don't believe there was anywhere that we were able to exceed, up to about a 5-year post wildfire rain event. And that doesn't sound like very much, but in post wildfire arenas, that's actually fairly significant. This is probably somewhere between 2 and 5. It will vary at various points through that various individual lot mitigation improvements that are being made. But in general, I would, expect somewhere between 2 to 5 years now. And so that's important to understand as well. We are not mitigating to the 100-year. We are not mitigating to significant events. And so 2 things that means. One, the types of things that you may still want to retain some of the original mitigation that you had as well. And hopefully you've worked through that with Christopher, and still be aware that the risk still exists. And Joe and Corey from Fuller will get into how we are perceiving that risk now. But having seen the presentation of that analysis, what you're going to hear is the risk still remains. We've seen very little recovery on the mountain. And we've seen a very responsive, even though we've had no monsoon, basically, which you'll hear from the Weather Service over the last 2 years, the small number of events that we have seen and the correlation of those events to the flows that we've seen tells us that we still have a very responsive watershed. So unfortunately, that risk still remains. That's not a surprise. We would expect that for many, many years. As we've spoken to you historically, looking again at Schultz, we had a very major rain event in 2018. And frankly, if we had not had the mitigation measures that we had put on, primarily those on forest, we would have seen a dramatically different outcome, although the impacts were significant. That was a major rain event. It was a 1,000-year rain event. but you know, we still did see benefit from the mitigation that was constructed in that area. But I say that because that was 8 years after the original fire. And we know today we can have events out there again. If you drive out there, you well know that the recovery on the mountain is very slow, and that although some of the immediate things that we're still seeing up there post wildfire, hydrophobic soils, that type of thing, have certainly lowered, say dramatically in the Schultz area, we still have a much more increased threat to mitigation. The other thing I want to share with you is that the contractor that will be performing this work, many of you have met Tiffany Construction members. They've done some other work out there. They placed the barrier and other work that they've done for us out in the area. They did almost all of the work in the Schultz flood area. And so they're very familiar with this type of work and construction. They're very familiar with how to operate on private properties and be conscious of septic systems. And most importantly, they're very good at working with the community. They pride themselves on that. And, you know, we were out there for almost 5 years working through Schultz. And, you know, I can tell you very, very few concerns ever came to the county. They were able to work with individual property owners and work through any concerns, most of the concerns that came up. Unlike many contractors that do not have that kind of capacity to work with communities, they do. So you're getting the top shelf here. You're getting you're getting a really strong contractor and a really good set of people to work with. And they've worked extensively with Natural Channel Design that did the design. So you got the top shelf team here. So we're excited to bring that team forward and get the project constructed. So with that, I think next up is Joe and Corey, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, hi, everyone. My name is Joe Leverich. I'm with J.E. Fuller here in Flag. And like Lucinda said, we were involved in the post-fire risk analysis end of this project, and also working to understand the downstream impacts that potentially would come out of whatever design was proposed through your neighborhood. So what I'm going to talk about today is just get into a little bit of the current, a little bit of an overview of high-level overview of how we approach the risk analysis, and then where the watershed is at now. And then Corey will take it from there with looking at some of the rain events that have happened and what that tells us about going forward. So go ahead, Christopher. So this is, you know, a general recap. The fire burned almost 2,000 acres. It was primarily within the Spruce Avenue Wash watershed, which is your backyard in Mount Elden Estates. About half of the watershed burned, and of that area, a little over half of it was moderate to severe soil burn severity. And based on the Bear Team report, the Bear Team investigation that came out, you know, right as the fire was wrapping up, was generally the soils were hydrophobic for the moderate to severe burned areas. Now that changes over time, but the hydrophobicity of a soil can change over time. But that's what it was in the immediate post-fire. Much of the area is steep slopes, as you know, in the Dry Lake Hills, swinging around to over to Elden. There's a lot of steep slopes in there, and that flooding, you know, it comes through the Mount Elden. It could potentially come through the Mount Elden Estates and on down into the city, where it could affect a lot of people. Go ahead. It's just a quick broad overview of the watershed. The watershed is the blue line, It's a little hard to depict on this, but the blue line, this is a hillshade, so you can see the burn scar is the red. The colored lines, the yellow and blues, those are the main flow paths. So you can see how right in Mount Elden Estates, you have two main flow paths that come together, that merge from the main Spruce Avenue wash and the tributaries that originate from the Dry Lake Hills, Dry Lake Hills side, towards the gap between the two meadows. Go ahead. This is just giving you a feel for what happened after the Schultz fire. This is one of the floods. And the idea is not to sensationalize it, but to get an understanding of what we're looking at here. You know, the water that comes off of fires is generally not clean and flowing nicely. It carries debris, it's muddy, sediment laden, carrying, you know, rocks and trees and boulders and whatever else is in the watershed. And so that's why these post-fire events can really pose a lot of damage to a neighborhood. Go ahead. So this is I'm going to take you through just a couple of pictures. The soil burn severity is the key driver in post-wildfire runoff. In this picture, this is a good picture because you can see the treetops are green, but the ground is burnt. So in this area, the watershed, there was a lot of duff and tree litter on the ground, and so the ground burnt very severely in a lot of places, while the trees still looked green. Now it looks a little bit different up here today because those trees aren't green anymore. But you can see the soil is really was really burnt in a lot of places. Go ahead. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a picture of kind of what that hydrophobicity looks like. It's when water beads up, there's the soil takes on properties in which the water can't infiltrate. And what that does is it creates runoff that not only it's runoff that can easily carry ash off the hill, and that can easily carry sediment off the hill as well, because that water really can't get into the deeper layers. And this is the little picture there is me holding a piece of mud kind of off of one of those very first events. And that's almost like a cement type surface that comes down and coats some of the channels as it goes down. That's to say that there's a lot of variability that happens within the watershed with not only the litter being burnt off, but also the soil's properties being changed. Like I said before, the hydrophobicity can change over time. It can decrease over the years. But this is kind of what it was looking like immediate post-fire. So the approach we took was a 2D model, two-dimensional flood model. So what that does is it not only models water flowing directly down a watershed, directly down a stream, but how it spreads out and how it goes around buildings or obstructions. And it's a very dynamic type model that's used extensively throughout Arizona and the Southwest. And with this fire, don't pay too much mind to the bullet points, but the idea here is that we chose a model that models both the hydrology and the hydraulics. And so we could change parameters in the watershed to determine what is happening downstream. And so as the fire burnt, and then as we got the final maps of how the fire actually burnt, we were able to create a model of that exact burn pattern that happened on the mountain. With that, what was really critical with the risk analysis is modeling a real monsoon event that could happen. So what we did was we took a storm that happened over the Schultz fire, one of the first events that happened over the Schultz fire, and applied that rainstorm to this watershed. So it was about a 2-inch event in about 1 hour, a little bit less than an hour. And that it's kind of a more common type of event that can pass through. Very quick event, but nonetheless, that can generate a lot of flooding downstream. So we wanted a real reasonable type scenario for monsoons. Go ahead. All right, and then I'll turn it over to Corey, talking about the rainfall gauges up on the mountain.
So after the fire, there was 3 rain gauges that were installed up in the upper portion of the watershed. The museum fire west, north, and east. And then there was one existing station down towards the south. And so that was installed the previous year before the fire. So it was collecting a little bit of data before the fire. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. You guys have seen this next slide where it has the thresholds of interest of where each threshold notifications are sent out to flood directors at 1/10 of an inch, and they are starting to monitor the rain gauges to see how much rain precipitation is going in there, as well as some cameras that are up in the watershed. And I'll be showing that in a little bit. The max threshold we've met since the fire was the 0.4 inches within 15 minutes, which sent out a notification to the Mount Elden estates. And I'll just, since you guys are probably familiar with this point, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I will go on to the next couple slides here. And so a lot of you are probably already aware of the Rainfall Gauge website, which are the links are shown here. The default precipitation amount that you see on that website is the amount total every 15 minutes. And you have the flexibility to kind of see where that is at and how that changes. But the precipitation that happens within 15 minutes to a half hour to hour, those short time frames are really what we're kind of concerned about. So they become more of a concern during the summer monsoon seasons. And so when that first threshold is met, the cameras start updating. Instead of being updated every 20 minutes or so during the daylight hours, they actually start updating every 5 minutes, so that you'll get some live footage that allows the flood directors kind of get a sense of what's happening up in the upper part of the watershed. So you can see where that upper Oldham is our camera that is the highest in the watershed, where that is located. And then the Museum Fire South camera is right there at the southern rain gauge at that location also. And then you got 2 more down, one within Mount Elden Estates, and then one just on at the boundary between the Coconino County and the city of Flagstaff a little bit further down. So those are kind of the websites that are out there. And so now I'm going to just start talking about the precipitation totals that we've seen on these gauges since they've been installed. So like I mentioned, the South Station was installed a year previously. So it has 3 monsoon record seasons of record. And you can see that first year, it got a little over 10 inches. And then those years after that have been less than half of that amount. And just to kind of give you a reference of a long-term record, which the Flagstaff official record is currently near the airport. And that official record runs from 1893 to 2012, even though the location has moved, at least in one point that I'm aware of, that's a long-term period. And so there's another alert rain gauge that measures similar in a similar method as the ones that are up on the fire near the airport. And the orange line there is the average from 1893 to 2012. And then you can kind of see how 2019 and 20 were well less than that. So that's what we observed on the museum fire side. And so on the Schultz side, we have a little more record, because after that fire, there's a total of about 10 stations now up on that mountain. Some were put down lower that first year, and then 4 more were put up on the Waterline Road. And you can kind of see, if you look at the last two, 2019, summer of 2019 and the summer of 2020, you can see how those 2 years, even on the other side of the mountain, were less than any of the previous years before that, for all the stations. And then the hash marks, this is probably just worth noting, of the extreme events that are possible. Really unlikely, again, as Lucinda said, those were up near the 1,000-year event per the statistics out there. And that hash mark was a total of about 2 to 3 storms, a 2-week period. And those storms by themselves exceeded, in most cases, at all the stations on that side too. It's just showing you this to show you that the precipitation totals that we've seen the last couple of years on the Museum Fire South are well less than the average, and that alone shouldn't be delved on too much, because it's really the intensity that drives it. So you can have one single storm all summer, and that one single event can drive a flood event. So I'll go ahead and start looking at that a little bit next. So looking at recurrence intervals. So this is what really drives the flooding potential during the event. It's these short duration periods from 15 minutes up to an hour. And NOAA Atlas 14 provides some statistics that kind of give you a benchmark to say, yeah, this is what you might expect in any given year for a flood event, and that's your return interval. So you can see a lot of 1s in here. So you have a return interval of 1 for nearly all of them, except for one that has a 2-year return interval. And what that means is, per the statistics, that a 1 means that you have, in reality, 100% chance of that happening in any given year. A 2 would be, a 2-year event would be a 50% chance of that happening with any given year. So for the 15 minutes, it started off pretty strong, and we got up to a 1/2 inch of rainfall within that 15-minute period. And that was enough to trigger quite a few notifications, and that's when you got the Rave 1 notification. And I'll show you some of the timeline of that, as well as a photo that was captured from that in the next slide. So we had a 1/10 of an inch in 15 minutes at 2:42. That was the first notification that was sent out. We had 0.25 inches within 15 minutes, and that's when we send field crew out to kind of get some eyes on the ground, start saying, hey, the rain's starting. It has the potential to increase to flood hazards. And so we need to get some people out on the ground. And then it also reached that 3rd notification level of 0.4 inches, which sent notifications to the Mount Elden Estates. And so you can see that the camera switched over and started taking 5-minute intervals. And so between 1455 and 1500, so just just before 3 p.m. It sent a photo, and this is what was starting to come off of the watershed on the upper Oldham water. So our highest camera in the watershed. And so if we go on to the next slide, we can kind of see what that really means. And we, as you're aware, probably we did some models for an inch of rainfall within an hour, 2 inches of rainfall within an hour. And so what I'm showing in the graph here is, in the blue line, is the 1 inch model rainfall event. And the Museum Fire North is the red line, and that was the one that sent out the notifications for Mountain Elden Estates, getting up to 0.4 inches within 15 minutes. And so it was tracking pretty closely to our model at that point before it started petering out at that location. Out of curiosity, to kind of verify how our models were doing still, to see if the watershed had recovered any in that previous year per what we were seeing. I put these rainfall events into the model and to look at what the results were. And the Museum Fire North was very close to producing the discharge at the outlet of the fire as we were anticipating per the model. So that suggested that the watershed conditions hadn't really changed at the time of this event from the time of the fire. So still, it hasn't received a large event as to the point that we've modeled, but it's showing that there is potential there still. And so I'll go on to the next slide. And this is just a reiteration of the intensities for 1 hour on the museum fire, on the Schultz fire side. So this is on the other side of the mountain. So this isn't what has happened in the museum fire watershed, but as we've seen in those other pictures, there's some correlation there, that the rainfall totals have been less than normal. So it's likely that our intensities are also lower than normal for 2019 and then 2020 as well. So these are just kind of intensities that we've seen on the other side of the mountain, and it's what drives the flooding within that you have the possibility of seeing. So that's just all this is just reiterating the points that have already been stated. And so for the next slide, we should start looking into the condition of the watershed. And I believe I'll turn that back over to Joe, just talk about what he observed out in the field.
Yeah, so the question is, what does that mean now? You know, the ongoing question is, do we begin to make model changes to reflect watershed recovery that's happening now? How much has the watershed recovered? Is that recovery pointing us to reducing the runoff from these models? And you know, we've done some hikes up around there a couple times this last year, and there's a couple of pictures I wanted to show you to just reflect some of the general conditions. So what you're seeing here is a picture. This is just on the ridge to the east side of the North Dry Lake, and so we're looking over towards Mount Elden. And so you can see the hill right in the foreground is right on the other side of the Brookbank Trail. The Brookbank Trail is right below this. And over to the back and to the right is the main Mount Elden. The big picture is, in a lot of these areas that burned severely, we just were not seeing anything that's growing. There's little tufts of grass maybe here and there, but there's two things. There's not a lot of evidence that a lot of rilling has happened, so not a lot of evidence that water has really run off the site, these areas that much. and there's just no change really in the way they look. Go ahead, Christopher. This is some more pictures on that same side in some of the high severity areas. And you can still see the soil almost has that kind of ash look to it, where it's either whether the ash was blown away potentially or just inherently mixed into the soil over time. It just hasn't really come off the mountain. And so that's what we're seeing in a lot of these areas, and really no regrowth. Go ahead. This is a kind of a contrast here in which the picture on the right, you can see the black stems of the trees, real moderate to high severity area. And this isn't to take away, the picture on the left shows you can see some of the grass that's growing in there and a little bit of regrowth. And so it's not to take away from the regrowth that's happening in some of the lower severity areas, because there is some, but the key drivers in the flood model are not the low severity areas. They are the moderate and high severity burnt areas that really just aren't, we're not seeing much change in. And that's not lending us to, to making that conclusion that, yeah, the watershed's looking great, it's recovering, the risk is reducing, that sort of thing. There's just, at this point in time, there's not enough to show us that it is, and there's not enough rain events to prove that it isn't highly responsive as it is modeled now. One other thing to point out is the aspect of the slopes, and we can kind of dive into this a little bit, is primarily the museum burned on the south aspect, the south facing slopes of the Dry Lake Hills into Mount Elden. So, so you can see the burn scar there, and you can see that aspect map. And so the yellows, greens, light blues, those are primarily the southeast, southwest aspects of those hills that, they're all pointing right at Mount Elden Estates right there. So you can see them from your neighborhood basically. And those are kind of the drier sides of the mountain. So go ahead, Christopher.
Oh, Joe, I just wanted to point out that typically we see, or do we see better recovery on the north-facing slopes as opposed to south-facing slopes?
I have not read any papers specific to that. I'm sure there's some more information out there, but I think, I don't know, in general, I mean, you look at the vegetation that's typically on these slopes, and a lot of times you can go from really your aspens and firs and kind of that type of vegetation more on the north sides of the slopes, and your drier vegetations on your south side. So I suspect that they come back a little bit slower.
Well, I certainly know that we saw with Schultz that there was a pretty significant impact on whether it was north facing or not. And even within the first, 3 to 5 years, we saw at least some greening of the areas that were facing north. There's a lot less of that, I think, in Schultz, but it certainly showed there that it had an impact on recovery. It's just the ability to hold the moisture and not get as much, evaporation, right? So I know when NCD went out and did their analysis post fire, and every year we had them go through and look at the watersheds in Schultz, and certainly that was a factor. Well, it's not the only factor, that's for sure, because steepness still has a huge impact. So
Yep.
all right.
So that at this part of the program, we're gonna pause on the PowerPoint and Brian, and we're gonna hear from Brian Klimowski.
Hello, let me go ahead and share my screen. Just a thumbs up if everybody can hear me. All right, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and get this going. There we go. And one more thumbs up if you can see my screen. All right, we got it. Thank you very much, by the way, for inviting me to chat this evening. I'm very thankful for the county, the city, J.E. Fuller, and those many agencies that have put so much into this threat of the burn scar above the city. It's so impressive to see all the work which is being done with regard to this. Tonight, I'm simply going to speak about what kind of outlook we have for the upcoming year in the monsoon. We've had a couple of very, very dry monsoons. And the question is always out there, is this a trend? Is this what we're going to see? Or can we return to some kind of normal once again? Let's go ahead and chat about this just a bit. As we know, we've had a relatively dry conditions this winter. We've been under La Nina conditions, colder than normal equatorial waters, which have limited the amount of storms in the area. Of course, we had a couple big ones there in January, but overall, it's been drier and warmer than normal this winter in the Flagstaff area. And the current projections are to continue these drier and warmer than normal conditions through the spring. Of course, this means there's a lower threat of rain on snow flooding, which we haven't talked too much about, but which is also a threat for the fire scar in the extreme cases. Right now, we really aren't expecting that. It's highly unusual, but something to keep in mind. Now, something I just have to talk about is we actually do have a storm coming later this week. It's going to be snow, so no threat of flooding over the burn scar, but keep your eyes out on the National Weather Service. Would not be surprised to see several inches of very welcome snow over our city by later in the week. So anyway, the outlook March through May. Because of the ongoing La Nina that we have, this graphic simply shows those areas in the darker brown where we're leaning toward drier than normal conditions March through May. This is typically what we see during the La Nina conditions. This is, again, what we're likely to see through May. This doesn't mean we're not going to see any big storms. It simply means that the frequency of storms that come through the area will likely be less, resulting in drier than normal conditions. Also expecting warmer than normal conditions through this period as well. But everybody wants to talk about the monsoon. What you have here is a graph which goes from left to right of the monsoon total precipitation each year measured from the airport. Okay, these are only observations at the airport to kind of keep things consistent. And you can see that it ranges from almost 20 inches in 1986 or 87 down to our last 2 years, we'll just call them our non-soon years, around 2 inches on each of these years, 2019 and 2020, but a great amount of fluctuation. What's interesting to note, though, is even with these 2 dry years recently, the trend is still upward. That means there's a slight trend of wetter monsoons as time has been going by over these past 50 to 70 years. So do we expect another monsoon? Actually, no. It would be highly unlikely. If I were to place my bets, I'd place my bets on 7 to 9 inches of rain over the burn scar this upcoming monsoon, which is about 3 times as much as we've seen in the previous 2 years. Now, keep this in mind, what this could mean. Okay. Before I talk about that, let's just go ahead and look at the official monsoon outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, basically showing equal chances of above or below normal precipitation through the period, basically saying, hey, there's no strong signal one way or the other. Okay, so the 2021 monsoon, what should we expect? Like I said, there's no signal toward drier or wetter monsoon. We're going to be in ENSO neutral conditions, basically no La Nina, no El Nino. So like I said, 7 to 9 inches of rainfall expected over the burn scar during this upcoming monsoon. That's what we would consider normal. But that's, over the burn scar, it's about twice as much as you had last year. It's about 3 times as much as the airport had. But over the burn scar, I think we had like 3 to 4 inches last year. So about twice that amount. What that is going to mean is not only more frequent storms than we saw last year, but the ability for the soils to become saturated and then respond quicker with the next storm that comes through. Last year and in 2019, we had pretty widely spaced storms that the soils, if they didn't respond, were allowed to dry out somewhat in between storms. I hope we're lucky again and the rain comes very gently and is not intense. I'm not counting on we're going to be as lucky as we have been the last 2 years. So we do expect to see episodes of flows off the mountain of a similar magnitude that we've seen before, with of course greater flooding possible as we anticipate a return to more normal conditions. Of course, the job of the National Weather Service is to work with the city, work with the county in issuing the flash flood warnings for this area. We'll have all of our meteorologists looking at the radar data, watching the gauges, and working with the county to make sure that we do all we can to let you know when there might be flows coming out of the mountain. So I'll just leave it with that unless there's any questions.
Yeah, Mark, let's see if anybody has raised their hand. We didn't actually pause for questions for Joe and Corey. Sorry about that. But let's pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions for Brian.
Yes, and if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. That would be great. I'm not seeing any right now, nor any raised hands.
All right. Yeah, I would be curious too, Brian. Maybe it's something you could tease out for us between now and the monsoon season. Is do you have the resolution of data historically to identify if when the peaks get rainfall events, does this watershed see? Is it pretty homogeneous the rainfall in this area? Or is there, do we have data that would inform us if there's, in a sense, a dead spot or a void where the Spruce Avenue watershed actually doesn't receive rain typically in the same nature other watersheds do?
That's a great question, Chris. Right now, we just don't have the resolution of data to see if there is any let's say weakness in the rain fields or the monsoon response. But typically over such a small area as this, the response would be very homogeneous across it. We normally wouldn't see on a fine scale like this any deviations like that. But the rain gauge network that we have over the Schultz is one that we can use to kind of tease out these data in a similar watershed. So certainly something we can look at.
I think probably the residents even have a better idea of what the National Weather Service predicts and what they often receive. We'll have to quiz them. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for participating. Thanks for the information. I'm excited to tell everybody it's 7 to 9 inches. Let's now turn it over to the U.S. Forest Service with Josh Peck for an update on Josh. I think what people want to hear is what the Forest Service has done up in the watershed since the fire, maybe what's planned and what you're all observing.
Yeah, so good evening, everybody. Josh Peck with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm the Deputy District Ranger in Flagstaff. Thanks for having me here to talk a little bit about what's going on the Forest Service side of things. I'm really going to talk about two separate things. One is the burned area emergency response work that was completed right after the museum fire in the past couple of years, and then the ongoing restoration work we're doing throughout the watershed. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to breeze through this so that I can leave folks time for questions. And I'll apologize ahead of time. I'm going to get interrupted by kids or animals or something at some point during this. I just know it. So as far as the bear work or the burned area emergency response work, that was part of the immediate rehabilitation after the fire. We're really through that process and completed with that work. And so some of the things that were done as part of that were, of course, we took some fiber mulch from the trees that we removed from that area. Were ground up. We put those back on some of the most critical, highly burned areas that were identified as part of the assessment. And so put that wood fiber on there to help stabilize the soil in event of a major runoff. One of the other big projects, of course, that was completed was stabilizing the Mount Elden Lookout Road. And that was fairly intensive and included some things I've never heard of. These articulating concrete barriers on some of the critical drainages coming down, designed to help stabilize and keep the road in place in event of some runoff events. Just knowing that we have critical infrastructure up on the top of Mount Elden that needed to be, that we need to maintain access to. And then a lot of the other road work that was associated with that was installing some additional culverts and some barriers for trapping debris. There were some other smaller projects included, which happened to fall under both monitoring of vegetation recovery and other monitoring in the area, and then some trail restoration and reconstruction. So like I said, all of that work's pretty much complete. So where we're at now is utilizing that monitoring that's going on to assess the situation as time goes on, whether we need to fund and do other work in that area. So I'm going to leave the bear stuff alone because that's a minor component of it's a major component from the post-fire mitigation, but it's a minor component of what we're doing out there. So I know folks are very familiar with the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, and we've been implementing that over the past several years. And we've completed several of the projects that were slated, including work around the base of Mount Elden, and then operations on that steeper slope to remove fuel, and also some helicopter logging again to remove fuel in that area. But we still have a lot of large vegetation projects ongoing around Schultz Tank, Dry Lake Hills in particular, that are planned to be implemented in the next, well, hopefully start this summer, but in the next couple of years. There's still more work to be done from the restoration side of things. And that's important because we want to be able to manage those fire starts. Like we saw with museum, we want to be able to have the treatment in place to help manage those starts so that we can not see the effects we're seeing with the museum fire. Some of the other smaller work still going on. We are moving some slash from the Mount Elden Lookout Road up to Schultz Pass staging area. And we're doing that simply because it's a lot easier. We have more control features there to actually burn those piles or get rid of them at the Schultz area rather than along the road. So we're moving it so it's a little more comfortable for us to be able to burn those piles at a later date. We are treating some hazard trees along that Mount Elden Lookout Road, trees that are susceptible to falling into the road, and that's just ongoing work that we're doing in-house. And And then, of course, we continue to go back and burn those piles and or chip some of those piles as we get the conditions. I think, you know, in January, we got that very good snow, which allowed us to really get after some of those critical piles that we don't get a lot of snow and are problems to control if we don't get that consistent snowfall. So that was a blessing for us to be able to finally get some of those burned. And then we have a variety of other smaller hand thinning projects still ongoing in several of the areas around there, which do have a fuels treatment component. Really quickly, you know, we do have some upcoming projects that have relation to this area. One of which is the Mount Elden Valley Hills Recreation Planning Project. And it does both from a public use aspect, having more people out in the area can increase the opportunity for ignitions, but also from a sustainable recreation standpoint and making sure that we have the right trails in the right places to mitigate some of those downstream effects is pertinent to this discussion as well. But wanted to inform people that we're going through that process right now, and in the next couple of months, we'll have a draft environmental assessment out for review and public comment. So wanted to just bring that up so folks were aware. The other thing we're starting to dig into, and we have to wait a little bit immediately after the fire to do some of this assessment, but assessing the woody vegetation out there and thinking out in the future years about replanting some of those areas. We are starting to do that assessment probably come this field season to see what are the critical areas for replanting and even what kind of trees we want replanted in that area. So that's what's going on with the Forest Service in the Mount Elden Dry Lake Hills area. And I'll open it up for questions.
Hi, everybody. As we open it up for questions, I just want to let you know, if you are looking for that hand raising icon, it is on the bottom of your screen, a little off center to the right. The Q&A icon is also there, and that's a little bit to the left of the bottom of your screen. I'll shoot you a message in chat so you can see that. Thanks.
Give it just a minute and see if anybody has any questions. I guess we're doing such a good job presenting that we're leaving people speechless. Well, thanks, Josh. Really appreciate the work that you're doing out there. And we will jump now. I don't see any questions. Let's jump back into the PowerPoint. Is it, can I get a thumbs up? That's a good way to do it. Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, thank you. So just to recap, right there as the fire was terminating, as they were putting it out, Coconino County Flood Control District, in coordination with the City of Flagstaff, had a big flood mitigation campaign. We mitigated approximately 400 homes and a little more than 30 businesses with the sandbags and the Jersey barriers. And I think that from what we've heard, and especially the monsoon that Brian told us about, we still feel like that the threat is there. We continue, and so we continue to do maintenance activities to refresh, reissue sandbags, and reaffirm the flood mitigation that we have. You may see around Killip School that we're removing concrete barriers, and Tiffany Construction, Herb is here. And I think Mike is here as well from Tiffany Construction. You may see them removing the barriers from the school, and that is to facilitate the new construction that's going to go on. We are going to leave some barriers there, and there is going to be some flood mitigation for the school through the monsoon season. But we're removing those barriers to facilitate the new construction going on there at Kilo. We've worked with Coconino County Flood Control District. We've worked with the City of Flagstaff, J.E. Fuller. You heard the information from the Weather Service. And so we've come to a consensus regarding our flood mitigation plan as we move forward and what the Flood Control District is recommending. And that we just haven't seen the monsoon rainfall events to be able to say that this watershed is not going to produce, post wildfire runoff type flood events. What we have seen has told us that it's a very active watershed, and that we are concerned and that we ought to keep the flood mitigation in place. So right after the fire, the county was able to procure a grant and work with the Forest Service. And we did about $225,000 worth of mitigation to stabilize the alluvial fan immediately upstream of Mount Elden Estates. That's going to help us arrest sediment above the residential area and hopefully not realize quite the severity of the bulking flows that come through. But we're not, this project did not attenuate the flow of water, but it did stabilize the alluvial fan, which leads to a decrease in sediment, ideally. We also, Coconino County also cleaned out an earthen basin, what we call the Wild Rose Basin Project, and that'd be on the western tributary from the watershed. And we removed the sediment. That was a one-time project that Supervisor Babbitt championed and provided a certain level of flood mitigation to the area, but we know it's somewhat of a sacrificial basin. And then we're in the final stages of carrying out more of a long-term flood control or a flood mitigation project that we want to restore the capacity and enhance the capacity of some of the channels through the residential area. We want to train the water away from some of the houses that are in imminent danger of flooding. We're going to provide a certain level of flood mitigation to those homes and those residents. But we're not pushing, we're not removing the flood threat to properties in general or parcels. The project aims at mitigating flood risk to structures, namely homes. So many of you, we've met with many of you, Charlie and I think Charlie's been in contact with every one of you. Charlie's engineer in training with Public Works in the Flood Control District. We're looking for the cooperator agreements, get them signed and turned in so we can keep this project moving. As we evaluated this flood mitigation project that the Flood Control District is funding, this is the area that we see as receiving flood risk, an increase in flood risk due to the museum fire. Here's Larkspur and Fallen Pine down here. There's just a little corner, a little area in Lockett Ranches. Most of the flood mitigation work that we're looking to carry out is within Mount Elden Estates. We're using those FLO-2D maps that Joe talked about, this 2-inch rainfall event, this depth map, to guide our efforts and guide the design of the flood mitigation work that Natural Channel Design, Mike Kearley and Alan Hayden at Natural Channel Design are championing. They're also on the call as well. And so when I'm done with the next couple of slides, if anybody has any questions for them as well. Well, this is the layout of the areas that we're going to primarily work in. There's a little bit more work that this figure could be updated in between parallel to Morning Glory right here. But up here, Larkspur comes across and there's Primrose. And this area right here, we're going to be reprofiling the road. We're going to be improving and replacing culverts. We're going to be increasing the capacity of the channels in some of these areas. Over on this western tributary, We're going to be training the water away from one of the houses there. We're going to be looking at some utility relocation efforts. The main part of the channel capacity and enhancing part is down here along Fallen Pine and Morning Glory, and increasing culverts. These two, out of the burn area, there's a western tributary and an eastern tributary, and they come together right here at Fallen Pine. And so we're looking at improving those culverts as it comes together. This is really the most critical area. And then more culverts here at Indian Paintbrush is the road right here. And then some flood mitigation around a house right here to train the water, keep it in the channel and keep the channel from eroding. And then we largely see water staying at the 2-inch rainfall event in the channel until and not impacting homes until we get down into the Larkspur area, or excuse me, the Lockett Ranches area, and there'll be a little bit of work down here on one property. So some of the things that you can expect when we do go to construction is that it's kind of tight through here, and Tiffany Construction has their work cut out for them to carry out this work and weave through the utilities that are there, get the culverts underneath the road. There's going to be some repaving of the road right here. And so there's potential to be a little bit of traffic detour through there. There's, this is a small residential area that doesn't feed a lot of homes, but we're going to be cognizant of that. And that's one of the reasons why we like working with Tiffany Construction, is they are sensitive and they do a really good job with traffic control and the detours and things like that. So we can expect when we go to construction this spring that this area from along Morning Glory and Fallen Pine, that there'll be some impacts to traffic. And then right here, there's a few homes on Indian Paintbrush that are also going to see this impact. So we're asking for your patience. We're going to reprofile a good portion of Primrose right here through this curve as well. And so there's going to be some traffic impacts up here as well. There's fewer homes up here, but this is important work, and it really is going to provide some much needed flood mitigation to the properties and the structures that are up here. So we're just looking for your patience as we carry this work out. And we'll have some more public communications with all of you when Tiffany Construction is on contract. We develop a schedule with them, and we'll know when we're going to hit these areas, and you'll be able to plan for the interruptions. But this isn't the last time you're going to hear from us about these traffic impacts and these access impacts. So we, as we design this project, we get with J.E. Fuller, and they run a no adverse impact analysis. And this will help us understand if there's adverse or negative impacts to the properties, namely downstream of where we do work and throughout the project area. And so they run a model through and see what the current condition is, and then they run the model through and look at what the post-project condition, the extent of the flood area, the depth of the velocity of the flood area. So they've ran this no adverse impact analysis, and it's indicated that there's no upstream or downstream adverse impact within the project area. So this is a key piece, a very key piece. And anybody that's impacted by this, Charlie and I have met with, and we've looked at the maps and we've talked through this. And so this should not be anything new to the people that are impacted by the change in the flow, if there is any, on your property. But we have had a third party, J.E. Fuller, evaluate this and provide us with the information that we're not adversely impacting anybody's structure. We're expected to go to construction this spring, pending all the cooperator agreements are signed. It's really a series of flood mitigation. We don't want to touch one property and not another and push flood risk from one property to another. We want to mitigate the flood risk throughout the whole system. So it's important that that everybody provides the cooperator agreement. And I think we've been really flexible, and we've answered a lot of questions. And so if anybody's still holding on to their cooperator agreement and they have questions, please reach out to us, and we can meet on site, or we can meet virtually like this, or we can just talk on the phone. But we can talk through potentially what your concerns are. Some people have said they don't want some trees cut, and we've tried to negotiate around that. Sometimes it's not an option, and so we've looked for other alternatives to that. We've looked at the realignment of driveways. We've looked at different things. We can't always accommodate everything, but there's a lot that we can do. So looking forward to getting those cooperative agreements back and getting this project going this spring. So we are waiting. We're holding out just a little bit to see if FEMA and the state level DEMA come through with a grant. And but we are going to start utility relocation work probably within the next week to 10 days. And so there's going to be some utility relocation work on private property, not on the public streets at this time. And so, well, when I say public streets, they're not county maintained streets, but the streets within the public neighborhoods. And then we're gonna hold out, but we'll probably be going to construction in April, mid to late April, for the rest of the project, pending the schedule with Tiffany Construction. So with that, we'll entertain any questions.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Christopher, just want to emphasize that it's really important that we, it's very important that we get all the cooperator agreements. We cannot go ahead. I mean, frankly, technically, we have to look at even starting the utility relocation work is a risk on the part of the flood control district. And so, we need those cooperative agreements, and we certainly can't go into any formal construction past that without those. So the sooner people get those in, the more likely that we'll start on time or earlier if weather allows. And what we heard from Brian is that we're looking at probably a drier spring. So sooner we get those, the sooner we can get started. Relative to that is that that this piece of it is really important. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, I know Christopher's been working hand in hand with people for quite some time, but you need to be communicating those very, very soon. We also do not expect to get the grant from FEMA. I think that's very unlikely at this point. They have not conducted the environmental clearances that are necessary for that approval. And there's quite a process even once they get the environmental clearances done to get that approval. But we did go to the board of directors of the flood control district, and they supported moving ahead with the project irrespective of the grant. So we have the money in the budget. So again, the sooner that we can move ahead with this and by getting those cooperator agreements, the better everyone will be. So get this done, get this buttoned up in case we have an earlier monsoon. So, all righty, great. Any questions? Anybody please put that into chat or use your Q&A. Use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand, whatever function you would like.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeronimo Vasquez. I was really impressed. Very, very in-depth presentations. Thank you. I got a little better understanding of the flood mitigation efforts with the museum fire. And my only question is, can I get copies of, or how are the PowerPoints and presentations that we just listened to tonight available to access? Because I know I would like to go back and look at some of those graphs and some of those pictures And I'm sure there's others in the community that would like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All the material will be on the Mount Eldon Estates website as well as the museum flood mitigation website as well. And then we're also meeting with you, Supervisor, on Thursday to go back through all this as well. So
Okay.
And you might want to, again, just to explain about this also will be on YouTube. Is that correct here? So
correct. Right. If
those
someone
that-
wants to listen to the meeting, correct.
So if somebody was not able to make this meeting, or you have a neighbor that was not able to make the meeting and is would like to look at this, it will be on YouTube, and they are welcome to go back and take a look at this.
Absolutely.
So are there any questions or anything else that you see there, Lucinda, or anybody have any closing comments? As I see, we're getting very close to our time, and it was wonderful to have so many folks here to provide information. The updates have been fabulous. The weather update was very interesting for this weekend, so thank you very much. And also long-term as well. And we appreciate everybody's very, very hard work on the flood control mitigation efforts there for the Mount Eldon Estates area. And thank you all again. Again, check out YouTube, and we'll make sure the materials are online on the website for you to take a look at. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone participating.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Hey, Denisio.